My native boy came to tell me that a native had gone down the path at the back of the station, carrying the hand and foot of his little girl wrapped up in a plantain leaf. He spread out the plantain leaf with the hand and foot, and I took the photograph. But there it was, as clear as possible, the hand and foot of his little girl.
There was a time in history when women were voiceless and those who weren't white weren't human.
No matter how great their impact or how many lives they saved, the majority of their stories were lost.
It's time to tell these forgotten stories.
This is Kodak in the Congo, the untold story of Alice Seeley Harris.
(1865). King Leopold II has just been crowned the King of Belgium following the death of his father Leopold I. King Leopold II acquires the Congo Free State as a private venture. Leopold thought that the Congo was full of natural resources. Since Leopold was the sole owner of the Congo, he saw an opportunity to make a lot of money. One way in particular was the harvesting of rubber, which was plentiful in the Congo. 1887. James Boyd Dunlop had just reinvented the inflatable tire. The bicycle was a new fad, and the demand for rubber had never been greater. King Leopold II needed workers to harvest this rubber, but how did he get these workers? Leopold had his men use murder, torture, kidnapping, and rape to coerce these natives into harvesting the rubber for him, and thus begins the atrocities in the Congo. It's thought that there were over 10 million Congolese men, women, and children who died during Leopold's pursuit of harvesting rubber. To put that number in perspective, the amount of Jewish deaths in the Holocaust is estimated to have been 6 million, compared to 10 million Congolese. Everyone associates Hitler's name with genocide and anguish, and recognizes the Holocaust as the epitome of human suffering, while the Congo crisis goes unnoticed, and King Leopold's legacy remains pristine, his face still being printed on currency up until the mid-20th century. Unfortunately, many of these atrocities have been wiped off the face of the earth and erased from history books. So how do we know anything about these atrocities? Meet Alice Seeley Harris, one of a handful of brave individuals that had the courage to tell the stories that would finally give a voice to the Congolese and condemn Leopold's presence in the Congo for once and for all. Due to the overlooked nature of the Congo crises, there is a very limited amount of information on Alice, but we found a woman named Judy Pollard Smith, a Canadian author that spent 9 years researching Alice and eventually wrote a book about her called Don't Call Me Lady, The Journey of Lady Alice Seeley Harris. Judy was kind enough to fly down from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada to Topeka, Kansas to be interviewed for our documentary.
It was 2003 and it was December the 17th. I remember that date, and there was a small article about her in our national newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail. It was about 600 words, and it just talked a little bit about this woman whose photos were seminal in helping to stop the atrocities in Congo, and that got me very interested in her life. Her father had talked non-stop about Africa, and he was very excited about it, but when he heard that she wanted to go, he wasn't as excited. He did not want her to go. And long story short, she met and married John Harris, who also wanted to go to Congo, so that was a great solution to her dilemma.
Just 4 days after their wedding, Alice and John left for the Congo on the SS Cameroon. After 2 years of moving around, Alice and John finally settled at a mission station at Baringa, which is a village where the Democratic Republic of the Congo now lies. Alice taught English to the natives while John led religious services. There were many dangers in the Congo, and Alice was often advised to stay at the station until a man could escort her outside.
One day she was traveling to a nearby village to offer to teach children how to read and write English, and she was accompanied by one of her students that she had already taught to read English. And as she was displaying his abilities, they began congregating around her, and abruptly the boy warned her that they needed to leave right away. And on their way back to their village, the boy informed her that they were planning to kill her. They began congregating around her, most likely because she was a white woman wearing all white in this native village. In an interview, Alice remembers the experience as dark clouds forming in the sky as the villagers were congregating around her and the boy. She describes this as one of the many times she escaped death in her time in the Congo.
Though Alice first began as part of a missionary trip, her focus soon turned to documenting the atrocities to the Congolese with one of the first widely accessible cameras that she was likely given by Harry Guinness of the Congo Bulalo mission.
And I think she became a very unwitting photographer. She did not know that was going to happen in her life, and her photos did the trick.
To learn more about the cameras and presentation methods that might have been available to Alice, we reached out to local expert Mary Dorsey Wanless, who is a professor of photography at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas.
Once photography came along, they used these kind of like you'd use a PowerPoint. It was used a lot by educators, by missionaries, salesmen trying to sell something. And it was used from the beginning of photography, probably in the 1850s, clear up until 1950.
I like to think she used it the way people use Twitter today to get the word out. Her photos, she took them all over Europe, all over America, the United States of America. And that's how the word got out. So she was a modern-day tweeter.
After returning from the Congo, Alice and John were eager to share their stories with the world. In the fall of 1905, John wrote to E.D. Morrell to propose a magic lantern tour with Alice's photos. Missionaries during this time often used magic lantern lectures to raise money for the mission trips, which were very expensive. John thought that Alice presenting would appeal to women and children, but Morrell was strongly against the idea. Therefore, the first lectures were done primarily by John, even though the pictures were taken by Alice. However, Alice did get the opportunity to voice the stories of the Congolese in 1905 when Alice and John came to the United States to present their lecture. Because of an increased demand for the presentations, Alice and John split up to cover more ground. In 49 different cities, Alice and John exposed the atrocities in the Congo by displaying her images using a magic lantern slideshow. Alice shares a particularly interesting story in an interview in 1970 with BBC Radio 4 for a segment called Women of Our Time.
Unfortunately, one Sunday morning, my husband happened to be away then, and I was alone. And my native boy came to tell me that a native had gone down the path at the back of the station, carrying the hand and foot of his little girl wrapped up in a plantain leaf. So I said, well, you watch for him to come back and tell him to come and see me. And he did. I got him to sit on the top step of the veranda, and he spread out the plantain leaf with the hand and foot, and I took the photograph. But there it was, as clear as possible, the hand and foot of his little girl.
That's her seminal photo. That was the photo that did the trick. The Belgian overseers also cannibalized his wife and child. So not only did he lose them, one way, it got worse.
In this interview, Alice was 100 years old, though her mind is just as sharp as when she stepped off the SS Cameroon in the Congo all those years ago. Through our research, we've been able to find one of the closest descendants to Alice, her great-granddaughter, Alice Seeley Harris. She was eager to share her memories of her great-grandmother via Skype.
Because my dad, he was always more interested in John, her husband, so Alice never really got talked about. It was all about Sir John, and he'd been knighted and he was a Liberal MP and all the stuff he did. So some of the stories that she tells, she just seems fearless. I mean, really, just, I'm here, I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm not even going to think about the consequences. She seemed to just love it. It just seemed to be her calling. I would say one thing actually about Alice is that she didn't seek recognition, which I think is probably one of the reasons why, she didn't go out to do it for any other reason than to help that famous picture Nsala when he's sitting on the veranda. The fact that he came to her, obviously she was thought of as somebody who was a sort of safe haven and that could be trusted. So yeah, so they came back and then they went out and did another trip. But then obviously by this time, King Leopold was getting to hear of this person who was going to eventually be part of his downfall.
When word got out about the atrocities in the Congo, Leopold was forced to call a commission of inquiry to go and listen to the natives tell their stories. They set up a mobile courtroom on a steamboat to sail down the Congo River and to hear the testimonies of the crimes against humanity that were taking place in the Congo.
3 judges came from Europe to hear the natives' complaints. And so Chief Lontulu came, and I think he was a very smart man because probably the European judges were looking down their noses a little bit, thinking, here's a man that has no education, can't speak English. So rather than use words, he laid a big red cloth the color of blood on the deck and laid out twigs to represent each death that had occurred in his village from the Belgians, just murder for no reason. If we learn about goodness, we can copy goodness. If we learn about, in Alice's case, I think she's taught us a lot about man's inhumanity to each other. And so we learn from her what evil looks like. And if we don't know what evil looks like, we don't know what goodness looks like. And I think that's what we learned from her, what goodness looks like.
2015. In America, we see riding bicycles as an enjoying, communal activity. It's strange how something we see as so simple and nostalgic served as the catalyst for a genocide just 100 years ago. It was the demand for rubber and Leopold's greed that led to the ruthless slaughter of over 10 million people. It's time to recognize these atrocities that took place in the Congo and those individuals who had a hand in ending them, namely Alice Seeley Harris. Alice truly is a role model because of the way she continued to advocate for the rights of the Congolese, even though her efforts were met with adversity. Although we live in a different time, there are still opportunities to make a difference in the lives of the oppressed and the forgotten. Alice was a woman who took down a king when women barely had a voice. How will you be remembered?